This week, Shabbat Shira. It is the Shabbos of the song, where they read the song that the Jewish people sang as they crossed the sea. It's also customary to feed the birds. So we'll get that custom out of the way. Feed the birds on Friday, Erev Shabbos. You could read about that elsewhere. Today, I'm going to resume something I started 4 years ago. And I invite you to join me in my teshuvah, in my return. 4 years ago this week, Project Lekutei Sichos began, where a group of ambitious people, Hasidim, decided to gather and prepare all the published talks of the Rebbe. 1227, I think, is the number of the specific talks that he taught at the Farbrengens, and prepare them for publication and for presentation. Now there's hundreds of thousands of Jews every single week learning those talks. So I invite you to join me, Project Lekutei Sichos. At the time, 4 years ago, in January of 2020, it began, and in this week's Torah portion, in Parshat Beshalach, I committed to prepare to share a little bit of each of those talks. In my running commentaries. And they do 2 sichos per week, 2 talks per week. Today I will share a snippet of each of them, both beautiful, one very powerful, as you'll momentarily see. But I'm missing 4 years of the previous ones. I hope to catch up. And if you catch up with me, then in 4 years we'll have studied all of the Rebbe's published talks. It was a series of an 8-year study. Anyway, we'll dive right in. And I have a clear message from God that this is the right thing to do now, because the first talk talks about the cloud that the Jewish people were in the desert, the protective cloud. And look at this. Tell me, do you not see the cloud? I literally see it. I feel it. I'm in it. I'm in the cloud. We'll get there in a moment. So what's this cloud about? In this week's Torah portion, Moshe and the Jewish people already had crossed the sea, and on the other side of the miracles, this one brazen nation stands up to them, Amalek, and wages war with them. Moshe instructs Yehoshua, Joshua, his faithful servant, to choose quality individuals, young, strong, God-fearing, free of sin, people whom the world wants to keep, whom God will still keep alive, and have them fight. Moshe goes up on the mountain in the sight, in the plain sight of all of the soldiers. He raises his arms in support and in prayer, supplication, and he prays to God, asking for their victory. The Torah tells us that Moshe's hands became weak, and he wasn't able to raise his hands, which is interesting because Moshe was a mighty, mighty man. And Rashi comments and brings the sources that say that Bishvil Moshe nit'atzel b'mitzvah, since Moshe was lazy, he was neglectful in the mitzvah, therefore he was punished, and his hands became weak, and his arms needed to be supported by Aaron and Hur. What's going on here? Asks the Rebbe. Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of all the Jewish people, the greatest leader of all time, was he lazy? Was he neglectful of his own people? Was he afraid to wage war? What was the problem? Says the Rebbe. The Rebbe talks about this at length, but I'm going to share a point of it. And he says that the calculation, this wasn't a laziness, it was a calculation. The Jewish people had just witnessed many, many miracles. They witnessed the plagues in Egypt. They witnessed the sea split, etc., etc., the manna coming from the heavens. They witnessed miracles galore. Moshe wasn't afraid to fight Amalek. The question really was, why did Moshe himself go out and wage war himself? Why did he send the others? And he went up on a safe mountaintop to pray. That was really the question. So everybody explains this and says that previously, until now, all the Jewish people experienced many, many supernatural phenomena. But now, it seemed to Moshe that God was angry at the Jewish people because Amalek's attacking them was in response to the Jewish people complaining, and there are many other interpretations to this, but the main idea is biblically, the Jewish people said, Hayesh Hashem Banu, Im Ayin, is God really with us? And because of that, Rashi relates a little tale somewhat similar to the footprints in the sand story we all are familiar with, but different, because God says, Rashi brings down the story that God said, imagine there's a father who's carrying a child on his shoulders to protect him from the oncoming wild animals. And the child looks around and he sees he's protected, but he doesn't see the father protecting him. So he says, where's father? Where's father? What's going on here? Why isn't he taking care of me? So the father says, oh, really? What kind of father does this? I don't know. Maybe one who wants to teach a lesson. So the father throws his child off his shoulders and lets the dogs bite. And he says, now, see where your protection is and where it comes from. So too, the Midrash says, the Jewish people witnessed all these incredible miracles. And now they're saying, is God with us? They were complaining about the food, about the water, etc. Is God really with us? Really? Says God. I'll show you. And he let Amalek go bite them. So that's what happened. So now Moshe calculated that until now, everything was miracles. God willing, later on there will be miracles. But this war needed to be fought in a natural way. This was Moshe's calculation. And therefore he said to Yehoshua, find warriors who are strong, able-bodied, free of sin. They won't die in battle, etc. And I, said Moshe, because he was 80 years old at the time, he said he's going to go up to the mountain and he's going to pray for these people that they should win. That seemed the appropriate thing to do. Moshe wasn't afraid because 40 years later, when Moshe was 120 years old, he went out and waged war personally against Sichon and Og, Melech HaBashan, the big giant, demonstrating that he knew that when God was with them, there was nothing to be afraid of. But if left to the natural means, then he needs to use a different paradigm, a different approach. And that's what he did. That's what happened then. Says the Rebbe, what's the lesson now? The story of Amalek in the Torah, it says, Ksov Zos Zikaron. In multiple ways, it says, remember what Amalek did to you every single day. We need to remember, we actually say it in our prayers. Zachor et asher salcha Amalek baderech b'tzeitcha mitzrayim asher karcha baderech. Remember what Amalek did to you. He tried to cool you off. He chanced upon you on the way. But the Hasidic interpretation is he tried to cool you off. He tried to relax your passion from going to get the Torah, from going to God. And who did he approach? He approached, says the Torah, and the Rebbe expounds on this, those who were weak and who were straggling. Who were these stragglers? Rashi tells us from the Midrash that these were the people who were not of the highest caliber, and they weren't the observant ones. They weren't the interested ones. And therefore the cloud of glory that we see here right now, it rejected them. It ejected them. It sent them out of its protection. There was the protective cloud that took care of everything the Jewish people needed, materially and spiritually, but it rejected them. And those were the people who Amalek tried to attack. Now, says the Rebbe, look at this. God Almighty is upset at Moshe Rabbeinu, at the leader of all the Jewish people, the greatest man of all times, for not personally engaging in the battle with Amalek. Moshe didn't completely walk away. He went up to the mountain. He delegated to choose the men of war. He went up, he prayed, he held his hands up, but his hands were weakened as a punishment for Moshe not personally engaging in taking care of those stragglers who were rejected by the cloud, by the protective clouds of glory. What does that mean for us? Says the Rebbe today in the here and the now. Says the Rebbe, Judaism, Torah, and mitzvos is this cloud, this beautiful cloud that you see right here in Cleveland, Ohio. Torah and mitzvos is the protective cloud that protects a Jew from all undesirable situations and all changes, the winds of change that are not necessarily desirable, appropriate for Jews. When a person is immersed in the Torah, immersed in the mitzvos, it protects them. It's like a cloud. Says the Rebbe, there are people outside of the cloud, either by choice, because they choose to distance themselves from God and the Torah, or by circumstance, not of their own. Our job, everyone's job, says the Rebbe, is to go and defend them and protect them and invite them back into the cloud and bring them in. But not only the people who have time on their hands and who are not busy doing more important things. Says the Rebbe, there's nothing more important. You could be learning Torah all day long. You could be doing mitzvot all day long. You could be Moshe Rabbeinu. And you could say to yourself, my job is to study Torah and to really keep the fire of Torah alive, or to do other mitzvot. Says the Rebbe, for that Moshe was punished. You need to personally, no matter who you are, you need to personally engage in bringing these people back to Judaism and bring them back into the cloud. And parenthetically, I don't remember if it was this one, or I think it was a different time, a few years later, where the Rebbe spoke about the cloud in this Torah portion also. I was in 770 at the time. It was on a Shabbos. I remember experiencing the cloud. The Rebbe says we are all in the cloud. We're in it. We're in God's protective cloud. And over here right now, it's easy to see. It's a very foggy day. So it's literally Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, that God orchestrated that this should be today's talk about the cloud, about bringing the people outside the cloud back in. And the people who are in the cloud shouldn't feel comfortable if there's anybody left outside. And I want to extend this to the protective cloud for our soldiers in Israel. Every single one of them should be protected by Hashem, for real, and should have no harm befall them. And all those who need healing should be healed, etc. Now I'm going to move on very quickly to the second Sikha from the Lakute Sikhas projects, which I invite you to join. Rejoin me and join me in my teshuvah for returning. God willing, this time will last and continue for the next 4 years. Learn 2 Sikhas a week. The next one, it'll be a very, very short one. Don't go away. And it's as follows. It's about Shabbos. It talks about, everyone knows that on Shabbat we have 3 meals. Friday night, Shabbat day, and Seudah Shlishit. The third meal is Shalosh Seudos. And the question is, first of all, why do we have 3 meals? And it comes from this week's Torah portion. Because in the Torah portion, it talks about the manna coming down. The manna was the heavenly bread, and God provided for the Jewish people whatever they needed. 3 times it says regarding the manna, it says the word hayom. 3 times hayom. Our sages learn from this, extract from this, or rely on this teaching that we have to have 3 meals on Shabbat. On Friday night, make kiddush, break bread, like the manna, 2 loaves. On Shabbat day, again, we break bread. And then on Seudah Shlishit, on Shabbat afternoon, we have Seudah Shlishit. The problem is, if you've ever been to a Chabad house, you noticed that all the other shuls of the world, bar none, they're all careful about Seudah Shlishit, about, we call it Shalosh Seudos, which is a very slangy, broken way to say Seudah Shlishit. Shalosh Seudot, which is not grammatically correct. But Chabad doesn't do it. Chabad definitely does not break bread, does not wash for bread for Seudah Shlishit, for the third meal. If at all, what Chabad custom is, from the Rebbes down, is to have a little bit of something, some fruit, maybe some cake, or something like that. In the Code of Jewish Law, it's clear. It says, even the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He says, we must break bread for Seudah Shlishit. Reality is, we don't do it. The question is why? And to cut to the chase, the biblical reference to this is because on the 3rd time it says Hayom about the man in the Torah. It says Hayom lo timtza'uhu basadeh. You will not find the man in the field. So that's the biblical reliance for the not breaking bread on Seudah Shlishit, on this 3rd meal, because by the 3rd time Hayom it says no. But there's also a deeper spiritual significance that the Rebbe explains at length, and in short, it is the idea that the 3rd meal on Shabbat is a very holy time of Shabbat Mincha, and it represents the time of the world to come, Mashiach's time, when we will not need food and drink to sustain ourselves. We still will have food and drink, but it won't be necessary to sustain our bodies. It will be a luxury. And therefore, says the Rebbe, the Chabad Hasidic custom became to not eat bread on the Seudah Shlishit, on the 3rd meal, as it represents the world to come, in which we will not need bread. But we still have something, because Mashiach had not yet arrived, contrary to some people's opinion, other nations, lehavdil, and we still need to have some sustenance from food and today we need sustenance from food and drink, and therefore we still eat something on the Seudah Shlishit, like some fruit, a piece of cake, or etc. And also related to that is that on Shabbat, for the people who experience it, says the Alter Rebbe in the same Code of Jewish Law, the Alter Rebbe says that it's a mitzvah to have a meal on Shabbat because it brings oneg, it brings satisfaction, pleasure to a person. But what happens if a person is allergic to the food, or the food causes a person pain? Should they still eat a meal on Shabbat? Says the Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch in the Code of Jewish Law, absolutely not. A person who's pained by eating should not eat on Shabbat, because that is his pleasure. course, hopefully the person is healthy and everything else. They were just talking about a specific circumstance. Related to this is someone who feels the times of Mashiach in that third meal, in the times of Shabbat Mincha. It would pain them to eat a regular meal like it was a regular day, and therefore they don't need to eat bread. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. I have a few previous running commentaries for this week's Torah portion for Rav Shalach that are incredibly phenomenal, talking about the splitting of the sea, why it was the wall of protection from the right to the left, talking about the benching Hazan et ha'olam kulo b'tevo being the first and only biblical blessing that the Torah mandates us to bless. Everything else is rabbinic. You can hear them and more if you scroll up or down. Maybe I'll put them in the links or in the comment actually. And please, I beg of you, do teshuvah with me. Return with me to the Likutei Sichos project. The link is in the title. Every week you have the teaching in about 30 different ways. You could have a 2-minute version of it, a 10-minute version of it, a 30-minute version, an hour-long version. Do the shortest one like I do. I plan to catch up on the last 4 years of my missed teachings, at least in the snippet versions of the Likutei Sichos project. And hopefully from now on, I will continue doing my running commentaries with the teachings from the weekly Likutei Sichos project. This way you're also connecting with hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world who are learning it every day for the next 4 years to finish the cycle of all the Rebbe's printed teachings. Thanks for joining. God bless you all. Share.